from the press.
This is All India Radio. You will now hear comments from the press. The Times of India, in its editorial titled Old India's Return, writes, "Dishearteningly, political rhetoric this election season is focusing more on labels, brands, semantics and prejudices than on substantive issues affecting voters." When Prime Minister Narendra Modi raised the Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas slogan, it connected with Indians' deepest aspirations. But hope is replaced by fear whenever he plays the identity card or dwells upon the Hindu terror versus implicit the Muslim terror type of semantics, as he did while addressing an election rally in Wardha on Monday. In reality, terrorists should be interdicted and punished no matter what religion they claim to act on behalf of, and it is surely tendentious to argue that no Hindu anywhere has ever been guilty of a terrorist act. If one must wade into this tedious debate, one could point to the LTTE, which extensively deployed terror. A former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi fell victim to the LTTE terror. Some may argue that while LTTE comprised largely of Hindus, it did not uphold any self-proclaimed religious cause. But then, where in this ignoble spectrum does one place communal rioters or lynch mobs who kill innocent people solely on the basis of their religious or ethnic identity, just like terrorists upholding ostensibly religious causes do? Us versus them rhetoric breeds divisiveness and fear, which makes it that much easier for mischief mongers to operate, with Pakistani intelligence services only too happy to jump into the breach. There is justification to the Congress charge that Modi is thereby looking at Indians as communities rather than citizens. Arguably, Congress too has often been guilty of doing the same thing, but that is no reason to continue with what is at bottom a British colonial practice. The Indian Express, in its editorial titled Hitting the Regulator, says, on Tuesday, the Supreme Court struck down the circular issued by the RBI on February 12, 2018, which directed banks to refer all bad loan accounts of over 2,000 crore rupees to the National Company Law Tribunal (NCLT) if they fail to come up with a resolution plan within 180 days. The court has said that the circular was unconstitutional and that a reference under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code (IBC) has to be on a case-to-case basis and with the authorization of the central government. The court's ruling is a blow to India's banking regulator, which had over the last 4 years forced domestic lenders to clean up their balance sheets by first forcing them to recognize the true extent of their bad loans and making full provisions for them. Against their will, the RBI directed them to take over 40 large bad loan cases to the NCLT. The latest ruling courts the danger of reversing all these gains. It also marks a dent on institutional and regulatory credibility, with all loan restructuring schemes having been disbanded as part of the simplified generic framework for resolution of stressed assets on February 12th. Surely the process of resolution will be further delayed, adding to the pressure on banks. Recent data points to the fact that even with a deadline of 270 days, resolution of cases under the insolvency law has stretched way beyond, thanks to gaming by promoters and some borrowers, weakening one of the most structurally important reforms in recent years. The Hindustan Times, in its editorial titled What New Delhi Must Do to Tackle Terrorism, writes, "It isn't often that one hears Pakistan's other neighbors levelling similar accusations about cross-border terrorism at the same time as India, but that is what happened over the past few weeks as both Iran and Afghanistan accused Pakistan of harboring terrorist groups on its soil. A day before a Jaish-e-Mohammed suicide bomber killed 40 Indian troops at Pulwama in Jammu and Kashmir on February 14, the Pakistan-based Jaish al-Adl claimed a suicide attack that killed 27 members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Subsequently, Afghanistan's defense minister accused Jaish-e-Mohammed of working with the Taliban to target one of the country's largest military bases in March, an attack that killed 26 troops. The accusations show that India is no longer alone in being targeted in a brazen manner by heavily armed terror groups based on Pakistani soil. When Pakistan's political leadership talk about their country's hard-earned gains against terror groups through military operations over the past few years, they often fail to note that these gains have been made against organizations within the country that were challenging the state's writ and not against groups such as Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba that have been used by the military as proxies to target nations such as India and Afghanistan. Those were the comments from the press presented to you by the News Services Division of All India Radio.